This is part two, where we're going to talk about a few more advanced functions, and we're also going to review some of the material from part one. So you have the option to follow along with me doing this if you want to. If you're not already set up with OpenRefine installed and the data downloaded, that may be a little bit too complex. I will go ahead and put the link to download the data set into the chat here. And so if you want to download that, go to that link and click on the download button, and then you can walk along with me as I pull that data into OpenRefine and begin working with it. Not required. You can get just as much watching this. And as Kay mentioned just now, we're going to be recording it. So you may want to just go back and revisit the recording. The other thing that will be helpful is I will be working, I'm putting another link into the chat now. I'll be working from this lesson in library carpentry, called the OpenRefine library carpentry lesson. If you're not familiar with the carpentries, it's a program that we are members of here on campus for teaching data and computational skills. Please do feel free to interrupt me as we go along here. I don't mind being interrupted if I move too fast or if something just isn't clear to you, or you wonder, I wonder if it can do this and that.
Hey, Clark.
Yeah, go ahead.
What version of OpenRefine are you going to use?
The one I'm using is 3.4, I believe. Yeah, 3.4.
Latest version. Okay.
But if you have 3.3, it really should work just the same. There's only one tiny difference that I'll point out when we go along. So for those of you who weren't in this first session, what is OpenRefine? It's really a way of cleaning raw data sets. It really, it's kind of a simpler way than hand coding everything sort of the way you would in R and Python, because it does have a visual interface that you can use to kind of more immediately see the transformations that you're making. It was developed by Google years ago, and they made it open source and opened it up and made it freely available to the community. And now it's developed by the community, so it's free to install, free to use. The way that OpenRefine works is it opens up in a browser. Those of you who are in the first workshop noticed that. So when you open OpenRefine, it will actually pop up in whatever your default browser is, if that's Chrome or if that's Firefox or Microsoft Edge. Any of those, it should work okay. My suggestion is go with Firefox or Chrome. Edge should work okay. Internet Explorer, stay away from that. That's pretty much a rule of life. And here's the web page to download. So when you've got OpenRefine running, you open it up, and this is what the first thing you'll see. You'll be asked to select a file. You can import all kinds of different file types. You don't just have to import your standard spreadsheet Excel file or CSV, although you can. You can also connect out to web data that is on a website or an actual database, an SQL database. What I'm going to do here is choose a file from my own computer, and I'm going to choose the data that I linked to just previously, which is this DOAJ article sample, and click on open. This is just a review, so those of you who saw this in the last session, please bear with me while I go through this again. Then the next page doesn't import the data set yet. It allows you to set some parameters for how to download, for what the data will look like when you create your project. So again, if you have a comma separated or tab separated, or sometimes people have other delimiters that they use to separate their data, that can be set here. This is one of the main differences between 3.3 and 3.4 is this option to automatically trim any leading and trailing white space. So what that means is if your data, say you have a character variable, like someone's names, and there's a space at the end of someone's name or a space at the beginning, what that will do in your data is it will recognize that as a distinct value, something different than the one that doesn't have a space at the end. So if you check this box, what that will do is it will automatically delete any spaces at the end or at the beginning upon importing the file. The other thing to keep in mind is the character encoding, especially if you're working with data that is created from a language other than English. You want to make sure it's brought in with the correct character encoding. Here you'll see more options for ways to parse data. So you can again pull in JSON if you're working with JSON, and JSON can be really tricky to work with. So OpenRefine is an excellent tool if you're working with JSON. That's a data format that comes back often from API requests. So if you work with APIs and you're pulling in a lot of data that way, you can work with JSON here as well as XML. The rest of this can be left alone. So I'm going to go ahead and, okay, the other thing to keep in mind is whatever you want to call the project. So the default is whatever the file name was, in this case, DOAJ article sample, and any tags, and these are something that you can add to it for your own shorthand whenever you open up OpenRefine. I'm just going to leave it as it is, and I'm going to click on Create Project. Any questions so far? Okay. So it sort of looks like a spreadsheet, right? We've got our rows and we've got our columns. One of the most powerful things in OpenRefine is these little arrows that drop down for each column. And when these are really the secret to making transformations and visualizing aspects of your data that you might need to make transformations to. So these, when you click on a arrow key here, it will pull down a list of options. And these are some of the things that Kay went over last session. So one of the most powerful tools is this faceting tool. And what facets do is tell you how much of each unique value appears throughout the column. And then you can select columns based on that. So what I'm going to do here is, well, I'm not going to use faceting yet. Then you have the options to edit individual cells. So this would be editing the values within each cell. We're going to do a lot of that later when we do some transformations. Or edit column, and this will make changes to the entire column, not values within each cell. Right? You also have the option to sort it, especially if you're working with dates or numbers or alphabetical data. You want to sort it. And then reconcile, we're going to use this later on when we look up some data in an API. One of the things Kay showed last time is how to split out multi-values. So it's very common for when you're collecting data to have multiple values in a single cell. And so if those values are separated by a single character, like in this case, it's a pipe, you can split those out. And so the way that you do that is you click on the drop down, you click on edit cells, and you click on split multi-valued cells. Then you enter in the character to split on, in this case, a pipe. If you're not familiar with a pipe, you can find that above your return key next to the backslash, and you'd hit shift. Right, so let's do that. And one of the reasons I want to go through this again is to emphasize the different types of views that you'll see. So the default view is to look at these in individual rows. So you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 with each author split out into its own unique cell. The other view option is record. And if you look at records, then it's more clear that this author, Angelo Plastino, belongs to this record here, the first record. So now you see 1 and then a blank, and then 2 and then a blank. Number 3 has 3 different authors, and so you'll see 2 blanks there. Okay, so do be aware of toggling in between rows and records, particularly if you have split your cells. If you haven't split your cells, it doesn't really make a difference because everything's going to be in one row, just like it was when it came in. So this is only relevant if you have any split values. The other things to look at on here are the number of records that it shows on the screen at once. As we go on, we'll see that just because it shows 50 records doesn't mean that 50 records are actually selected to do operations on. That's just the limit of how much it will show on the screen at one time. And if you want to navigate to subsequent pages, you can click on these next and last buttons over here, or first and last if you want. All right, so I don't want to keep these split right now. I don't want to overcomplicate things. So there's a couple of different ways that I can reverse that. The first is to join them back together, which, as we would expect in the edit cells, just as we had split, we also had join. The other way to do it is just to undo it, right? So the way to do that is if you click over on the left side here, right next to the facet and filter operation, you see this undo and redo. Now this will show you everything that you've done so far that you have kept. So in this case, we've only done one thing, and that is split the multi-valued cells. I want to undo that. So I'm going to go back to step 0 where we just created the project. So I'm going to click on step 0 there, and you'll see now my authors are back into one cell, which is what I want. So, and then I'm going to click back on facet filter again, and that's it. It's undone. Any questions about that? All right. Let's look at faceting again, because that's a really important concept and can't really review it enough. So what faceting does is, again, allows us to visualize what's in a given column. And this can be handy for spotting errors, for discovering blank cells, for getting a good raw count of, okay, how many of these values do I have? So in this case, I'm going to look under the publisher column. So I'm going to click on that drop down arrow again, and I'm going to click on facet, and I'm going to click on text facet. We're not going to look at any of these other types of facets, but they can be useful. For instance, if you have a date range, this will show you a nice, neat little scatter plot. I mean, a nice little line plot looking at the frequency of each value, each date. So you can also look at a scatter plot of how many values appear within, again, we're looking at just that column, not the data set as a whole. So those are worth exploring on your own time, or if we have time at the end, we can maybe take a look at that. But right now, I'm just going to do a text facet. And what that means is I'm going to visualize, treat every value in here as a piece of text, a string of text. And then, I've applied that. Again, if that was too fast for you, I click the drop down, I hit facet, and I hit text facet. And so you can see those over here. Now the default, I actually am not positive what, the default is alphabetical, right? So and you can see that here, sorted by name. If I want to sort it by count, by which value appears the most, I can click on the count. And see, we should have introduced this data set. Each of these rows represents an article in a journal. And then each of the columns is information about that specific article. All right, so in this case, there are 858 articles that were published by the International Union of Crystallography, 93 by MDPI, and so on. right? So now this is already a really powerful way of getting a quick look at our data. If we want to see blanks, okay, this column doesn't have any blanks. You can see there are 7 choices, and all 7 of those are showing up here. If you want to see blanks, I'm going to demo that by looking at this license column. So I'm going to click on license, facet, text facet again. Okay, and this time I see blank. There are 6 items in there that don't have any data in there. If you click on that item, blank, that will then show you those items. And you can see here in the license box that each of these are blank. So one of the ways that you can fix that is you can click on the little edit box in the cell. And let's say I want all of these, I know what all of them are. Let's pretend like I know that they are all CC by, CC space BY. Then what I can do is I can either click on apply, which will apply that to this specific cell, or I can click on apply to all identical cells. All right, and the identical cell is again in that specific column. So any blank cell in that column will now change from blank to CC by. Now, if you've done that and you're following along, you see that it's vanished, right? There's no data here. And that's because we still have the blank facet selected over on the left-hand side. Okay, so if I want to view, again, all of the CC bys, I can now click on CC by, and now I have no blanks in the data set. Another review here, just another couple minutes, and then we'll start getting into new stuff, is clustering. And clustering can be very helpful if you have messy data, if you have like hand-entered data where you know that people may have made mistakes in typos or capitalization variances, and you want to normalize that column so it's consistent, right? And so the way that I'm going to demo that is I'm going to, again, go back and split the authors column. So I'm going to go to edit cells, split multi-valued cells, split it by pipe. Okay, now I want to cluster it. So I want to look through this and say, are there any authors in this data set who have authored more than one article? And if so, I want to make sure their name is identical through each one. And that might be important if I'm doing analysis later on down the line and I want to say, well, this author wrote X number of articles in this data set. And if I haven't normalized it, then I'm not going to have accurate data. So the way I do that is, again, click on our little drop-down arrow, and we're going to, again, do edit cells. And in this case, we're going to hit on cluster and edit. All right, and so what this is doing is it's using a special algorithm that identifies similarities between values. There's a whole science behind this in computer science, fuzzy name merging. And you can see some of the options here. So in this case, we're doing what's called a key collision merge, which is different from a nearest neighbor merge. They both have similar functions. They just differ in the way that the differences are calculated. And then the keying function, again, there's all kinds of science that goes behind which is the most, and it really depends on your data to figure out which is the most accurate or not. So in this case, I'm just going to leave it on fingerprint. But if you are playing with this on your own, you want to definitely try out these different algorithms and see what comes back, and probably read up on the differences, especially if you're doing this as part of a data analysis for publication. You really want to know kind of how that's all calculated out. Mike, you pointed out that the text facet for publisher shows 3 misspelled MDPI AG values. And that's useful. That's incredibly useful. and it also makes it easy to clean up and fix those too. So, all right, so here, okay, let's take a look at, I've selected the Ngram fingerprint, and here you can see these are probably the same person, right? This one just looks like R period space A period, Nagalakshmi. So now it's up to you as the person who has presumably collected this data or knows something about it to say, yeah, this is the same person, or no, it's not. And then you can do what's called a merge those together, and you specify what the new merge value is. So do you want a space after your R period or not? That's up to you. We'll say not. And in this case, we'll say not. All right, and so on down the line. And I have worked with data that had people putting in names for, it was from a single university over the course of like 30 years. And you wouldn't believe how much time this saved. The other valuable thing about this is it will show you how many rows are each one. So in this case, I have 8 rows that have the space and only 1 row that doesn't have the space. So maybe I actually want to keep the space. That looks like that's the more common convention here, in which case it will just fix the one that is different. Okay. So after you do that, you can merge selected and recluster, in which case it'll merge those and it will show you what's left, or you can merge selected and close. All right. So we're now going to move into the new stuff, transformations. For those of you who missed the first session, that Kay mentioned that she has a recording that she'll be providing. And don't worry, I don't think that this will be too intense for you. The things that I skipped over are sorting, really, and some more about faceting. So let's talk about transformations. Now we've already done some transformation. We've split cells, we have edited cells, but I'm going to show you a little more kind of technical way of doing it, and that is through something called GREL, G-R-E-L. That is the programming language that OpenRefine uses to, that's kind of a special programming language to support making transformations on data in OpenRefine. It stands for General Refine Expression Language. It's similar to, if you think about Excel, where sometimes you type in equals, sum, parentheses, and then you select the cells, that kind of thing. So it's sort of the same way, or if you're a Python or R user, then you're familiar with it as well. It's kind of writing out text-based commands to get the data to do something. So some transformations are used regularly, and these are accessible directly through the menu options. And you can look at those through, let's just pick one. Let's just pick language. Click on the language dropdown and you go to edit cells. You'll see this common transforms. So these are already programmed in. On the back end, they're using GREL functions, but you don't have to type out any GREL, so you can just select these from the menu. So some of these include trimming, leading, and trailing white space, which we've done when we imported the data set. Collapse consecutive white space. So let's say you have a person's name with 2 spaces and then their last name. This will collapse those 2 spaces into one. You have some specialized functions for working with HTML and ASCII quotes. You can convert the entire column to title case, uppercase, or lowercase. You can convert it to a number or to a date, which I'll show you in a moment. Or you can convert it to null or to an empty string. And this can be particularly helpful if, let's say, lot of people have been working on the data, and some people write n/a, and some people write not applicable, and some people write NA, and some people just leave it blank. What you can do is then select all of those by using facets. Then you can run a transformation on those to say, I want to make everything that I've selected in my facet, again, which you do over here on the left-hand side, you select the cells with the facet, then you say transform, and you say, I want to transform these all to null, right? So let's do some of this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I'm viewing as rows. I'm going to clear out this facet. That's something I kind of flew by, but it's really important that if you have a facet applied, that you clear that out before doing any more operations. Because the fact is, you can see up here, I only have 960 rows selected because I have 960 observations here in CC BY. So that means if I do any operations, it's only going to do it to these 960. Now, I've been working in OpenRefine a lot, so I've been guilty of that, where I'll put my facets on, I'll do something, and then I'll move on to the next project, and I'll forget to remove the facet. So that means that I have bad data because I haven't run the transformation on the entire data set. So there's a few ways that you can remove the facet. The easiest way is just to click on the reset button in the upper right-hand corner of the facet. And now I have my 4,009 rows, which is what I want. You can also just close the facet out completely, which removes it from your view entirely. It's really up to you what you want to do. Okay, so okay, let's go forward. I'm going to look under the publisher, and I'm going to create a text facet. And as you mentioned, Mike, we can see here these variants on MDPI. So that is a case of consecutive white space. So if we want to remove that, we click on the drop-down arrow next to publisher. We click on edit cells, common transforms, collapse consecutive white space. And now we see that went to 96, and the MDPI with 2 spaces in between is removed. Pretty cool. If that didn't work for you, or if you've never made a transformation and you're not seeing it immediately, you can click on this refresh button in the top left, and thank you. And that will bring it up to speed. All right, so let's dig a little deeper into transformations, and let's write our own using Grell. All right, so Grell is like a programming language. So that means you have to be precise and you have to be exact in what you type in, otherwise you're going to get an error. Let's try this. All right, we notice as we browse in our records here, we're only looking at 10, that these titles are all in title case. In other words, they're not in all caps, not in all lower caps, but that's just looking at these 10 that we see here. Now, what if we notice that there are some journals where the data comes from that the titles come in all caps, and we want to easily and quickly transform those. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a facet. I'm going to do a publisher facet, which means I'm going to go here and publisher facet, text facet. If you haven't closed it, it's already there for you. Oh, it looks like I have 2, so I'm just going to close that one. Right, and I'm going to select, let's see, what's going on? Okay, I think I forgot to reset my license, so I made the exact mistake I told you not to make. So if you're seeing this correctly, I'm going to sort it by name. And the ones I'm going to select are OkStateLibrary Enterprises. And you can either click on the title or you can click over here on include. Something I don't think I mentioned earlier, and I can't remember if Kay mentioned it, is you can edit it directly from here. So I could have just gone to that MDPI that had 2 spaces, gone over to edit, deleted that extra space, and then that would have taken care of it, done the same exact thing. All right, so in this case, I'm going to click to include OkStateLibrary Enterprises, and I'm also going to include the Society of Pharmaceutical Technocrats. So I'm going to click on include there. And as you'll see over here under title, all of these titles are in all caps. So we have 19 matching rows. In other words, 19 articles that are included, which would make sense, 13 plus 6 over here. And this time I'm going to type grel. We could do a one of these deals, common transforms, but I want to get us used to writing grel. So I'm going to click on drop down next to title, go to edit cells, and go to transform. Right, and the way that grel works is it's always going to start with value. So this is saying what value are we going to change? And it's going to be either a text string, a date, a number, and then followed by a period. So I'm going to type in value.period. So that means it's going to take the value, which in this case is our text string, our title. And now what do you want to do with it? I want to make it to title case. Now notice here I have lowercase to, capital T for title, and then title case, the whole thing, the whole rest of it is lowercase. Right? And then I'm going to put empty parentheses. So that will say whatever is inside the parentheses is my value to transform. And then it will give us a nice little preview here so we can see what it will look like if I run that transformation. So all of that looks good to me. So I'm going to click OK. You can choose what to do if there's an error. And we'll run into that here in a little bit. You can make it blank, you can keep it the same, or you can store that error in a separate place. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on OK. And now I've got my transformation. Nice. Any questions? All right. Just revisiting quickly our undo redo. So now we've done several things. Now let's say I want to share what I've done with someone else so that they can look through and complete each step. Or let's say I collect this data every week, and every week I have to make the same transformations. Well, obviously I'm not going to want to go through here and click this, click that every single week. And so that's where it's useful to use this extract function. I'm going to click on extract. So when you click on undo redo and then click on extract, you'll see this big long list of looks like nonsense, but it's not. It's JSON code or really data. And you can set some, you can see over here on the left side what each step does. So I've done 5 things. If I maybe didn't want to keep the last step, I could deselect that. Wouldn't really recommend deselecting prior stages if later stages are dependent on those transformations, if you see what I mean. So you want to make sure that if you're deselecting anything that it's standalone, and otherwise you're going to get an error. And then all you have to do is really select this and paste it into a text file, like open up Notepad or I can't remember what the Windows one is called, and just save it as a text file. And then to apply those, the next time that you pull your data set in, you just right away are going to jump over into apply. Okay, so I'll just demo this. You don't have to follow along if you don't want to. I'm going to go way back to step 0. I'm going to click on apply. I'm going to paste in that JSON, and I'm going to perform the operations, and then it will take care of all of the transformations that I've made. So it's that simple. As long as your data is the same or has the same column names, that's very important. You want to make sure that the column names are identical, because if you look at this, it's relying on those column names to determine what transformations to make. Then it should work just fine. All right, moving on here. And talk about data types in OpenRefine. So I'm going to jump back over here into Facet filter. I'm going to go ahead and remove this facet by clicking on reset in the upper right corner of the facet box. So every piece of data in OpenRefine has a type. The most common type is a string, which is another word for a piece of text. So we can see here title, authors. DOI is a string, even though it's got numbers in it. It's also got slashes and letters, so it's going to be considered a string. ISSN over here is also going to be a string because it has a hyphen in it. Really, the only thing in this data that is not a string is date. You've got number. We don't have any numbers here. We don't have any Boolean or true false values here. So if you want, right now, this was pulled in, date was pulled in as a string. But if I want to treat it like a date, then I have to transform it into a date. So in other words, if I want to view it like a timeline, then I need to tell OpenRefine, this is not a character string, this is a date. It's basically like reformatting it. So the way you do that is you click on the drop down, you click on edit cells, you click on transform. There's an auto way to do it. Actually, I'm going to, do I want to show you this? Yeah, I'll show it to you just because I'll show you how you create a new column. So let's say I don't want to overwrite this one, but I want to create a new one. Okay, so I'm going to click on transform. Now under value, I'm going to type in to date. Now I can tell it what format I want the date in. So I'm going to put an open parenthesis, quote, and I'm going to say DD for day, MM for month, and YYYY for year, the British European style, and close it. All right, and we can see in our preview here that we've got from January 11th, 2015, transfers or transforms into the date 2015 1101, and then 1101. So then I'm going to click OK. All right. I skipped a step. If I had wanted to create a new column, I would have done edit column, add column based on this column. I would have done that first, and then I would have done the transformation, right? So I skipped that step, but that's a good one to know as well. And that's because that's a column-wise operation. That's under edit column and not edit cells. Any questions on that?
I have one.
Yes, Kay.
So I'm interested in the fact that format on that date that it showed did not include the time, but the time fields are included in the final result.
Well, and the other thing is I put in DD, MM, YYY, and it is now in this ISO. So that's what I was pausing and trying to think about. So let's see this. Edit column, add column based on this column. Let's say value to, let's see, edit column, edit cells, transform value to date, DD, MM, YYY. All right, day, month, year. And that's also different because the input is month, day, year. So this isn't specifying what the input value is, nor is it specifying what the output value is. So I would have to plead ignorance on this one. I don't know. And honestly, I really only ever do it like this. Edit cell, common transformation to date. So that's why I'm not sure what the DD, MM, YYY deal is about, but I can look it up and try and get to the bottom of it. Or if anyone else here knows, I'm absolutely happy to learn something.
I don't know, but my suggestion might be that the parentheses are enclosing the format of the input, and it's assuming that's the format the data is coming in on, and then it transforms it into a date cell, which then is padded out with all of the blank time values because it just assumes the time is midnight or something.
So that's a good observation, and it's possible that that is true because if we look at the dates, so if we say this is date, month, year, none of these would be invalid because there's nothing above 13 in the day, month, in the month column. So suspect you're right, and that if there was a 113, it would throw an error saying there's no such 13th month. That's probably it.
It looks like the dates are in European format already, and it's just assuming that everything is published on the first day of the month. So you've just turned those from strings of text into actual real dates. That's
precisely. Think you got it. Thank you very much.
So what I was actually trying to figure out, is there a way to trim it? So, when it converts it to the ISO form, is it possible to trim it so that you don't get, because there's time, there's clearly no time values to input. So that's
right.
That's what I was curious about.
That one, let me see something. I think in order to do that, you have to make it into a string. So in other words, here's how you would do it. I'm going to edit the cells and transform them into date. Then I'm going to edit the column, add column based on this column, call the new column name formatted date, for instance, and then say value to string dd mmmmm yyyy. Let's see if that does anything. Need quotes.
And the month?
Month, I think
is full format. Oh, yep.
So MM puts it as one MMMM makes it the full month.
Oh, okay. Got it.
But then I don't know if I would be able to visualize that as a time, as a date, because now it is stored in the system as a string, I think. All right, we have a couple more important things to get into. I want to show you how to switch author names first and last. And then if we have some time, we'll look at the querying the API. I also want to make sure that we get to how to export the data when you're done with it. Okay, so we're now, always before we make any transformations, we want to make sure that we have no facets applied. So if you can quickly check that by just clicking on remove all, and that will just take all your facets away. We still have our authors split, which is good. So we want to detect, first of all, if there are any in here. So I'm going to go to create a custom facet. All right, and so the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to go to Facet, custom text facet, just like we saw with custom transformations, that there are some already stored here. There are also some customized facets, like you can get duplicates. You can get any errors, facet by error, facet by null. We're not going to get into that. We're going to create a custom text facet. All right, and what I'm going to do is type in value.contains. Okay, and I want to see any items where the name contains a comma. And then I'm going to put at the end toString, period, toString. So I have value.contains, open parentheses, quote, comma, quote, close parentheses, period, toString with a capital S as string. And then open and close parentheses. So the toString will just convert this true and false into a string value. So it's nothing to really worry about right now. So I'm going to click OK. Now I have my my text facet over on the left-hand side with true representing all of the values that that little algorithm detected a comma in. So if I click on true, now I'll see, right? So Martinez Garcia, comma B, Suarez Hernando, comma O, and so on. I can click on 50 to see them all because there's 44 total rows that match that. All right, now, so I've clicked on true, so I'm only viewing these 44 matching rows. Something, okay, I can't remember if you went into, but let's just review it if you hadn't, is the use of this stars. Stars can be very helpful if you want to keep track of any changes that you make. So you can star a row, and then you can go back and look later on and view those stars to see, okay, what changes, kind of group them together. So in this case, I'm going to click on the drop down next, right above the star, and I'm going to click on edit rows, star rows. And then I'm also going to click on that again and go to facet, facet by star, and that will show my facet, which I'll use a little bit later on. Okay, now I want to make my transformations. So I'm going to click back into our authors dropdown, and I'm going to edit my cells, and I'm going to transform. I'm going to leave the value there, and here's what I'm going to do. This one gets a little tricky, but bear with me. So I'm going to type in value.match. Then I'm going to enter in something called regular expressions. Now, I know I'm throwing out a lot of jargon here. Regular expressions are kind of a totally separate programming language that you can use to manipulate text strings. So don't get too caught up in what I'm about to type. You can learn regular expressions. It takes some practice, but you can learn them. So I'm going to do a slash. This slash means the beginning of the regular expression. And then I'm going to do period star. So parentheses, period star. And what this means in regular expressions is any group of characters. The period is any character. And then the star means that appears any number of times. So this is any group of characters that appears any number of times. Then a comma, which is literally a comma. And then again, any group of character that matches any number of times. And then put a slash to end the regular expression and close the parentheses. So what it's done here is it's created something called an array. So within this value, this row number 493, Martinez Garcia, comma B, it has created an array that matches any string of text. Remember, any character that appears any number of times, and then a comma, literally a comma. Actually, it should probably be comma space, because I don't want to keep that space, and then whatever appears after that. So what appears before the comma space and what appears after the comma space are now in their own distinct kind of places. So what I want to do then is I want to reverse those, and then I want to join them back together. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to continue writing here in Grell, and I'm going to put a period, which means we're on to another function, and I'm going to do reverse, open and close parentheses. Now we can see that those two items that matched have been reversed. Then we want to join them together. So I don't want to keep them separate like they are now. I've done my transformation. Now I want to join them together. So I'm going to click on, I'm going to type period join. And then what do you want to join them together with? Well, let's try it out, and let's just put nothing, empty quotes. That's not right, because it needs to be a space there. So I'm going to join them together with a space. Now we can compare for each one of these. Now, if there had been two commas, it may not have worked. There's a lot of things that you have to be careful of when you're doing these kinds of matching. A whole lot of assumptions that you're making about your data that might not be true. And sometimes OpenRefine will catch that kind of stuff with errors. But in this case, it looks like it worked really well. We've reversed our authors, and we say, okay. So I'm going to just go ahead and put this in the chat in case you want to just paste that in. And I'm going to press OK. Now, my facet, which you remember was created to detect anything in the author column that had a comma, now has 0. So I can reset this facet. Now, if I want to go back and look at those starred values, I can come over here into my starred rows, and I can click on true. So I'll be looking at any of those items that I had starred in the last step, and we can see nicely that the authors have been fixed. So we're barely scratching the surface of what Grell can do. It is a really sophisticated language that's got its entire manual of functions that, as you can see, it's incredibly powerful. It can save you a lot of time. So we have 1 minute. If you want to stick around and watch me query the database to pull in more data, can. Before you go, I want to make sure you know how to export. So you can export this entire project, which means all of the operations we've done, the data set, everything, and in that case, you would send that zip file to a colleague who also had OpenRefine, and they could open up the entire project. Or you can export just the data. So you could say, all I want to do is the data that as I have it now. You want to make sure and remove your facets first. But you can say export it as a comma separated or an Excel. And there's a whole lot of other formats that you can export it as. Any questions? All right, so let's take a look at querying an API. So what that means is there's this database out there that has a list of publisher names in it, and I want to go through that database and find journal names. I'm sorry, journal names, and find a specific journal, and pull that in and create a new column that's got that journal name in it, based on this identifier here. Because you'll see these are all articles. Each one of these rows is an article, and I've got the journal name here in the citation box: Entropy, Agriculture, International Journal of Molecular Sciences, but that's not parsed out. So one thing I could do is, if I'm sure that everything before the first comma is the journal name, I could do a transformation on this citation column and just pull out everything up until the first comma and create a new column based on that. But there's, first of all, I have to be sure that that's true. And second of all, then I have to make sure that there's no typos and all that type of stuff. So there's another way of doing it, and that is to use this ISSN. And ISSN is a unique numeric identifier that is given to a specific journal. So every journal has has this unique ISSN, and so I can be confident that if this ISSN is right, then the journal name is going to be right. So I'm going to connect out to an existing database of ISSNs called Crossref. Now, first of all, I don't want to look up all 4,000 of these. I just want to look up one of them. So I'm going to go ahead and apply a facet on my publisher column. And I'm just going to choose, let's see, let's just pick, is this the one I wanted? No, it's not the one I tested earlier. Yeah, let's do the MDPI, okay? So I've faceted to only include MDPI. Now I'm going to go to my ISSNs column, and I'm going to choose Edit Column, Add Column by Fetching URLs. So I'm going to give this new column a name, call it Journal Details. And I'm going to write some grel in here. So, well, first I'm going to click on this show function. And this has to do with what instructions you're sending the API. So sometimes you have to put in special headers and other information in order to get data back from the API. Like some APIs like you to give your email address, for example. Some of them require it, some of them don't. In this case, I don't believe that Crossref requires it, but I'm going to add mine anyway. So I'm going to put here, again, I clicked on the show. Under user agent, I'm going to put a semicolon, and I'm going to type in my email address. And that's it. All right. You can try it. If you're following along, you can try it without it. I don't remember if it would work or not. All right. And then in the expression is the GET request that you want to send the API. So typically that's going to be in a URL. And so in this case, if you're following along, I'll go ahead and paste the GET request into the chat. So it is this, and you would get this from the API documentation, what you need to send. So essentially, I'm going to send this URL over, and then plus value indicates what this value is. Remember, I chose to create a new column based on my ISSNs column. So it's going to loop through this list of ISSNs. And for each one, it's going to send a request out to this API at this URL, replacing, so the request itself is actually going to look like this. You know, in reality, that's what it's going to look like when it sends out to the API. The API is going to get that, and it's going to say, oh, you want details based on this journal. And it'll send me back a package of data, which we'll take a look at. So delete that. And let's go for it. So keep an eye out for this yellow box. Sometimes that'll appear when you're doing big operations that are time consuming. Maybe I should have picked a smaller data set. I didn't think that this one was going to take very long. So we'll see. I might cancel it out and do one that only has like 6. But another really useful thing that OpenRefine can connect out to is Wikidata, and Wikidata has a growing kind of base of data that yeah, this is taking way too long. I thought I did it earlier for sure on MDPI, but I guess I was wrong. So I'm going to cancel this. Sorry about that. And I'm just going to pick like 1 or 2 journals just for illustration. So my shortcut to just picking a handful of rows is I'm going to star them. And then I'm going to go to my Facet by star and choose the starred columns. Okay, so we'll just do this too, entropy and agriculture. So again, ISSNs, edit column, add column by fetching URLs, show, put in my semicolon email address, call it journal details, and then put that and say, okay. And this should be easier. Yeah, anyway, Wikidata, like an example of that is another data set we work with for this workshop is a data set of rodents, like information about rodents. And there's columns for genus and species. And so you can query out to Wikidata and it will look up each genus, species, each value, and it will pull in all kinds of other information about that genus or that species. All right, so that came back much faster. So here's our added column, journal details. This came back in JSON, which is, again, a data format that often comes back from API requests. You can see some information in there like this is relating to the specific journal, which is entropy. I guess that it might be ironic. Information about the journal, like how many of the articles in this journal have the authors published with an ORCID identifier. Here's the journal title, entropy, subjects, general physics and astronomy. How many of the articles in the database have abstracts added, and so on and so forth. Well, if we want to extract the journal title here from that, then we need to parse the JSON, which you can also do here in OpenRefine. So I'm going to click on my dropdown next to journal details, edit column, add a column based on this column, and let's call it journal title. And in this case, I'm going to write some grell to parse that title out of the JSON. So I'm going to say value dot parse JSON, and that's just with one capital J, open and close parentheses. And then if you know JSON, there's all of these nested values. So the title is in a value called message, and then title. So you see it's parsed out of the message node of the JSON, the variable title, right? And hit OK. Now I have my journal titles, entropy and agriculture. Now, I know I've introduced a lot of concepts, and a lot of this depends on you knowing stuff about querying APIs and parsing JSON and all of that kind of stuff. We can help with that, and we regularly have workshops, not on APIs and JSON really, but on other computational topics. And so I guess I'll just close out with encouraging you to continue attending these workshops. We have 2 workshops on Unix coming up next week and the following week. We have a workshop on R, I guess probably shortly after that. We're also available to help. So as you start working with OpenRefine and pulling your own data in, if you have questions for us, feel free to send us a message.